Well, it's a beautiful day here, beautiful summer day here in Charleston, South Carolina in the Low Country. And I, Rick K. Jones, welcome you back to Shaboom. This is the podcast, as you know, for and all about baby boomers. And you know those boomers, those of us that were born between 1946 and 1964. This was that mid-century baby boom, post-World War II. Soldiers came home from the war, started having lots and lots of babies, and one of the largest groups, still today, one of the largest groups in our population. Our show today is largely about hospitality. That's the word for the day. We're a very hospitable generation. We throw great dinner parties, great weddings, great bar mitzvahs, wonderful cookouts, lots of charitable events. We picnic at Chastain Park. We bring comfort food to funerals, and now we often host our grandchildren's birthday parties. We like a good time. No, we love a good time. You know, one of my favorite songs is the classic George Strait song that says, I ain't here for a long time, but I'm here for a good time. My grandson, Levin, recently turned 5. From the time he was teeny till now, our song, the song that we sing together and dance together, is a song by Alan Jackson called Good Times. It's a wonderful song about having good times, and again, written by another baby boomer, Alan Jackson. Here's some great quotes about hospitality. Walt Disney, who knew a whole lot about hospitality, said, do what you do so well, they will want to see it again and bring their friends. Isn't that true? It sounds like Disney, doesn't it? Kathleen Norris said, true hospitality is marked by an open response to the dignity of each and every person. I love that. Acknowledge them, take care of them. Author Nathaniel Hawthorne once said, life within doors has few pleasanter prospects than a neatly arranged and well-provisioned breakfast table. I love that. I'm a big breakfast guy, and so I can agree with Mr. Hawthorne there. And finally, Justine Voigt said, hospitality is making your guest feel at home, even if you wish they were. That's pretty fun. Great quotes about hospitality. My guest today knows a whole lot about hospitality, the hospitality industry. She knows about producing amazing hospitality events. Sharyn Outtrim has had a long career in various hospitality agencies and events. And then she taught those skills to a new generation with her company, Field X, and is now joining a company called Paxis AI, in which you're going to use artificial intelligence to better educate people in the events and hospitality space. I think we're going to have a fun time talking to Sharyn today, so let's welcome her to Shaboom. Hey, Sharyn, thanks for being part of Shaboom today.
Hi, Rick. I hope you're doing great on your island. I'm on my island.
It's good to live on islands, isn't it? Even though no man is an island. I think somebody very famous said that at one point, you know, from that standpoint. I'm going to ask you the question I ask all my guests, the first question. Where were you reared, and who were some of the early influencers in your life?
Well, I grew up in 5 different countries, 5 different cultures, 5 different socioeconomic levels. I mostly grew up in Toronto. But I was born at Syracuse University while my father was doing his PhD in education. The first place we went to was Malawi in 1966. He was with the Ford Foundation. And then we would go back to Toronto in the early 70s. I grew up in Nigeria right after the Biafra War. And then in the late 70s, lived in Manila. And then in 1980, I was in Melbourne, Australia. He was with La Trobe University doing a sabbatical. And then we came back to Toronto, but we traveled the whole world. And the Canadian correspondence courses found us in every place we went. So we went to two schools. And I would say who influenced me the most? I would say my parents. My father was very passionate about third world, which we spent a lot of time in, and how we elevate that country through community colleges and technical schools. So I grew up with a lot of diplomats, a lot of military. We were never living on a military base, but I was always a civilian with access to both Canadian and American. My dad was Canadian, my mother was American. And I would say probably one of the biggest influences in my life was my Aunt Vera. And she was a very tall, incredibly interesting woman. She took art classes at Syracuse University for 35 years, the same course for 35 years in art. And every semester she would look at a different topic, but she had a radical side to her. She was also the wife of a well-known lawyer and belonged to the country club, and one semester decided to focus on obese nudes and did an oil painting of the country club women playing bridge. And so why I bring that up is we went traveling, and she just beat by her own drum. I always felt like an outlier growing up in these different countries and being the new kid on the block, not only in the same culture, but with different clothes, different accent. And she told me to be me and don't apologize, because when I get to be older, people are just going to say, oh, that's just Vera. That's who she is. So she was a woman in her 80s that drove a blue Corvette, smoked long Moore cigarettes, taught me how to drink vodka on the rocks. And that was my Aunt Vera.
That's interesting. Now, you tell a fascinating story about the power of a soccer ball in Nigeria. Tell everybody that story. I find that to be fascinating.
Well, my father was with UNESCO, and he was hired to bring back the educational system, the community colleges and technical schools after the Biafra War. And for those of you that don't know that, it was a very volatile civil war. And we lived in a compound, missionary compound, that was probably the lowest socioeconomic level. We had open sewage in the back of our house, and the compound was mostly made up of missionaries. And I know there was a priest, and on the other side of the fence was an open air school. And my brother and I were never allowed out of the compound, and we'd stand there and we'd actually watch the kids on the other side of the fence. And I just remember standing there, and these kids, some of them didn't have shoes, some were disheveled. But I remember one day someone brought out a old soccer ball that was kind of deflated, and they started playing. And then what happened was I felt this joy, and I wasn't even there. I was watching. It was probably the first time I was a sports spectator. And all of the external major life issues they were dealing with all went away. And they were kids that were playing. And while I was only 7, that stayed with me. And I didn't recognize how much it stayed with me until a couple years ago, when people asked me, how did I get from one industry into another? And I realized that was the start of my invisible thread with sports, and how and why I got into sports.
You know, being exposed to other cultures and being kind of the new kid, I think served you well for later working in organizations where you're working with disparate groups, disparate organizations. You always had the ability, I think, I called it tap dance. You could dance in situations. What's the old line? Never let them see you sweat. I never saw you sweat. I always saw you just figured it out as you went along. And I think that was probably great training. But I laughed that you're not that big a sports fan, and yet you've worked in sports like crazy, and you've worked on some of the biggest sporting events in the world from a hospitality standpoint. But because you never let the fact that you were a groupie or sports groupie get in the way of doing what your job was, which was to make sure that the people that were there were having a great experience. Talk a little bit about that.
Um, yeah, I grew up academic. We played board games. My parents were not into sports. I was a less than mediocre um, athlete. But I was hired by the Georgia Dome a month after they opened in 1992. I had never been to an NFL game. Um, and I had never worked in a stadium. I had come from the Four Seasons and in DC at the convention center, and I was looking to make a change. And I think what happened there was no playbook. We That was probably the best team I've ever worked on and the best people I've ever worked with. Uh, and I would put my foot in my mouth. I even did a stand-up comedy show, open mic night in Chicago, about how many times I put my foot in my mouth with famous athletes. And people that got to know me knew that. Um, but I was really focused on, I guess, going back to that spectator point and having that visceral feeling. But also, my hospitality background was one of service. And that's what I focused on. When the Falcons were losing in the 90s, I started thinking about how do we keep the suite holders happy, the premium seat holders happy. It's like a club. We've got renewals. So I created a program called Dome on the Range, and I'd have them come into the industrial kitchen. And I remember Tommy Nobis rolling truffles alongside the CMO at Delta. So for me, the sports went outside of the actual event and it went into other areas. And I always saw it totally different than everybody else. And that's probably why I was invited to create entire categories and build as many hospitality programs as I did for the NCAA, because I didn't see it like everyone else.
Well, having worked at Four Seasons, I can say we're about to get a new Four Seasons we're a couple of years away, but a new Four Seasons in Charleston, which we're very excited about. Highest level of service. I mean, and so you have that kind of mindset, that's global mindset, and then you have that training at Four Seasons, and then you apply that to the hospitality, because not only did you create unique events, they were always high class, exquisite type of events. But the other thing that you always did really well was utilization. You mentioned Tommy Nobis doing that. You would use personalities in a way. Talk about using personalities and why that made such a difference to the hospitality activities.
I think what I recognized was the fan and what brings joy to the fan, and my goal was always to bring out the inner child of a corporate executive. And if I did that, I knew I had a home run. And so it started very much like with the Tommy Nobises and the Falcons, moving into when I left the Georgia Dome and spent 6 years building an entire category of hospitality for the NFL. I realized the power of the athlete. And it wasn't really until I started building the NCAA's March Madness and Final Four. And you have to remember, I would go into these different sports and I'd have to learn the sports, but I spent more time learning about what the fan loves about the sport and what their perspective is. And with the March Madness, that was probably my favorite. I was invited to speak at the NBA Retired Players Association, and I learned the statistics that so many of them, 3 years is maybe their shelf life. And then there were so many of them that were out of the spotlight, but they were still really well received by their fans, and it was intergenerational. So when we look at like Artis Gilmore, when we did a game in Jacksonville, that would pull in the grandfather, the father, and the son or the daughter, and that would be an intergenerational component. And what I realized there was some of these guys might have their numbers might have expired, but their reach and their stories and their lesson never expired. And I think working in college sports, coming from Canada, where there's not as many schools, there's like a minuscule amount. What I recognized here was I've met a lot of retired players, a lot, and I've got to know a lot of them. And I think they liked me because I didn't really know what they did on the field or the court. But the point is, I never met a college fan, a retired college fan. And then I recognized intergenerational college fans, but then the mixed marriages, like the Auburn and the Alabama fans. But when you pull in these talent, the other piece that I really loved was what it brought out in some of these guys. And I remember there was a time with Elgin Baylor, and he felt so it brought him back to the days when he was on the court, because over the years I've learned and I've known how difficult it is for a player that leaves the spotlight and the change of their life. So that increased sales. It made the pregame, postgame hospitality more personal, and that was regional, and it didn't have to be an A-lister. It was more relevant to where we were.
I remember we had the Final Four in Atlanta one year, and I had gotten the NCAA did not have an airline partner at the time, and so I got Delta Airlines to be a sponsor of the National Association of Basketball Coaches, and we were doing a lot of work trying to raise money for Coaches versus Cancer for the American Cancer Society. And I went to a bunch of the retired coaches, and I got them to come to the Sky Clubs, the Delta Sky Clubs in multiple cities, to just sit in there and watch the games on Thursday and Friday, the first round of the tournament. I had gotten that idea. I'd been at Logan Airport on a delayed flight, and I sat with Doug Flutie and watched college basketball. And it was a cool experience just to hang out with Doug Flutie and tell stories and watch games. And I thought, what a great experience. Well, we ended up having, Lefty Drizel and Bobby Crimmins and Hugh Durham and Jim Harris. I mean, we just had all these retired guys that went to different Sky Clubs and did that. They told me later that people would miss flights. They would just say, I'll catch the next flight. I'm not leaving the game. I'm going to stay here with Coach and watch it. And we raised money for Coaches versus Cancer. But it really showed the power of the personality. And, you talked before about, some of these guys, coaches, that they would want a chalkboard in the skybox so that they could actually, tell people what they were going to see, break down the game differently. And so a lot of what you tried to give people were experiences that really money couldn't buy. In this case, money could buy it, but it was, I have a saying that I like a lot, and I use it in my monthly newsletter, On the Road with Rick, called a lanyap. Lanyap is it's a Cajun term that means a little something extra. And you always kind of brought a little something extra to the hospitality thing that kind of surprised and delighted people. Talk a little bit about that.
I think it's probably because I wasn't focused, again, like everyone else was focused, but I also, being the daughter of a professor, grew up more academic. And when we did our appearances, it wasn't, I wanted someone to walk away with what happened to you in Logan Airport. You probably felt like you were sitting in your living room with Doug Flutie next to you. There wasn't any hype. You were just two guys and probably a bunch of others. And that was what I wanted our guests to feel. And so everything from the way a room was set, and I also wanted people to get a glimpse behind the scenes. I think one of my favorites was Robert Ory. This was in Houston. Robert Ory, and I did a reunion. So I did a reunion with Robert Ory and Wimp Sanderson. And the room was really long, and I had Wimp come in one side, Robert come in the other, and in slow motion it would have looked like a love story, and it was, because the coaches' impact on lives of the players is something that I cherish, being able to see that interaction. And the more I did that, the more people fell in love with being in those events. And another one was in Indianapolis. I had Christian Laettner, and then I heard that Jalen Rose was in town, and then I heard people saying how much they hated each other. Then I had to go and research it online, and then asked Christian Laettner, would you mind doing a reunion with Jalen Rose? Years after, when they were playing. And it was really real. It was everyone came right up to the stage, and I always like to have the stage and kind of have a connection there. So that's really kind of what I focused on, and what I really fell in love with, the appearances. And then incorporating some good. It was Houston Final Four, where Coach Dale Brown, who I'm lucky enough to call him my mentor, called me and told me about an elementary school basketball coach in Chicago that was shot and in a wheelchair. What can we do for him? He needs a van. And I said, I have $40,000 or $45,000 left in my talent budget. If you can get Shaquille O'Neal to come in, I'll get a giant check printed. He just needs to swoop in. We'll give him the check. And that, if I was to hire him specifically, it would have been much more expensive, but it had a purpose. And everyone that was I don't know if you were at that event, that Villanova, I think that was Villanova's first year. Everyone felt the love in there. And then I also brought in an under 19 wheelchair basketball team from Houston that was heading to the Nationals. So I always thought about connecting dots. And what happened there was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wanted to be a part of it. And it was the legends and this next generation, this wheelchair. It was probably one of the coolest highlights. And I still keep in touch with Sean Harrington, the basketball coach, who's doing amazing, and has written a book up in Chicago.
Coach Brown, we all have heroes in our lives. He's one of my biggest heroes. I mean, Dale Brown, I just love the man. He's had such an influence on my life. The theme of our podcast series this year is turning success into significance. Everything he did was significant. I mean, he just did so many things over the years and found so many ways to give back. As the daughter of an academic, though, you have this great career in hospitality, and then you realize that there probably was some academic processes that could be applied to what you were doing. And so that took you to your next venture, which was My Field X, where you broke down hospitality into what I call digestible bites, and you figured out a way for online learning, remote learning. Talk a little bit about that and how that was important to help the industry.
Well, that started early in my sports career when we had to run the Super Bowl in 1994. We needed an army to run our hospitality. And over the decades, I realized I didn't need experts that were doing it. I needed people that had power skills like self-awareness, situational awareness, resourcefulness. And I started working with local universities. And that's probably where the academic piece comes in. Also, I'd speak to the students, and then we'd bring them in for a micro-internship. And I did that for many, many years, and got to the point where I had done everything I wanted to do. I'd done Olympics. I had really come to the point where what's next. And I was really passionate about creating a better workforce for the future, probably because my daughter Lucy is that future workforce. And field experience was born from a phrase my father said, that every teacher and student need to have one foot in the classroom for theory, and one foot in the field for experience. So field experience became a micro internship component, and it was Coach Dale Brown that told me student athletes miss out on a lot. They miss out on internships. They can't do it. So I started thinking, well, what if they did short ones off season? What if the football team worked a basketball team, and instead of being the heroes on the field, they were working a hospitality and behind the scenes or registration? And over the years, those students have used that, and some were in computer science, some were whatever they were in. The hospitality component and the interaction with people was really the key part to help them with their resumes and move forward. And the concept was great. The timing was atrocious because we launched it 3 months before the pandemic. F1 in Austin, 2019 was the first event. And then the last one, I think, was Super Bowl, and then all the events shut down. But we kept going online.
It's amazing how we focus so much on technical skills and forget the soft skills. You know, somebody asked me one time if I had to say what was the one thing that made me successful in life. If I had to pick one thing and one thing only, and it's grit. I mean, it's just grit. I had a former basketball player that played for me named Blaine Brooks, and he paid me the highest compliment. He said, "You may beat Rick Jones, but you better pack your lunch because you're going to be here all day." I mean,
I could see that.
he recognized the grit. And yet our educational system does not teach soft skills. And, you know, no matter what, we're going to talk in a minute about artificial intelligence. We're talking about online training. We're still in the people business.
And I call it power skills. There's nothing soft about it.
Exactly. Power skills, but we don't teach them. And it's amazing. The other thing I think we don't do in education is we don't recognize a child's gifts. You know, I believe gifts are God-given. And what we should do is we spend all this time working on kids' weaknesses. Why do we do that? They'll hire their weaknesses. Work on their gifts. Their you know, what they're good at, make them great at. And I think part of that is getting young people to understand these are your gifts, and now I'm going to give you tools to grow those gifts in a big, big way. I want you to tell the story about your partnership with Edward Moses, because that is another one that I think is really fascinating, and how it kind of changed the way you thought about things.
So that's another person I had to research. And I got a call from former Olympian Leslie Maxey, that Edwin, three-time Olympian, wanted to do a virtual town hall to bring the 1980 Olympic team that lost their opportunity to go to the Olympics because of the U.S. boycott on a Zoom or virtual meeting with the 2020 athletes heading to, or supposed to be heading to, Japan.
I had a man that worked for me, Bob Neiman. He and his wife Susan, they both worked with me. Bob was favored to win the gold medal in modern pentathlon and didn't get to go. Air Force Academy graduate. Modern pentathlon is that sport that was created by Pierre de Coubertin. De Coubertin's childhood heroes were the French Napoleonic soldier. And so he created a sport where you had to mount the nearest horse. You had to get the courier through, mount the nearest horse, run, swim, fight with the weapons of the day, which was a sword and a pistol. And he created this sport called modern pentathlon, but he didn't go. and then my good friend Dave Gavitt, who was the longtime basketball coach at Providence, who later was the commissioner of the Big East, he was the basketball coach on the 80
Dan
team.
Gavitt's dad?
Yes. Dave was the head coach of the team that didn't get to go. And so that group was forgotten. And there were so many great athletes that were part of that 80 team.
I'd love to see at the LA Olympics something that honors that. But going back to this story, what they needed was students, young people, to help the 1980 in the beginning of this pandemic, and I think this happened in March, get onto the Zoom. So I assigned a different student to each of the 1980 Olympians, and I thought I was getting onto another flat screen with a bunch of people in squares. But what happened was that same feeling that I had when I was 7 behind that fence, the same feeling I have when I'm at a major event and fans have, that gets you right here, that visceral feeling. There was crying, there was laughter, there was camaraderie, there was advice. I realized at that point that we didn't need a venue for capturing those moments and having those feelings, which I recognized as the ability of making human connection, and then with field experience, increasing human potential. And that gave me a whole new canvas and this whole new bizarre world that we're on literally right now.
Well, now you're going to pivot again, which I think is fascinating. You know, one of the things I love about you is you always have been a lifetime learner. You're never satisfied with what you know. You're always trying to find. It was like the story you said, I had to research the athletes. I didn't know anything about the athletes. I go research them. I figure them out. I begin to understand.
Yeah, but sometimes I didn't do a good job, and I'll tell you a funny story if you want to hear before we get into this.
Yeah, tell it.
2008, I was with Prime Sport, and we were looking at sponsoring a golf tournament, and I was told to go to this golf tournament and meet Jim Brown. So I researched him, and besides the fact that I was born at Syracuse University, what stuck in my mind was what he was building with Amera I Can, his foundation that goes in and trains with life skills and power skills gang members and in prisons. And I was fascinated with that. And so I get there, and the event, the head of the Black Panthers and Hells Angels, and their motorcycles are parked there, and then there's CEOs, and then there's NFL legends. And I recognized Jim, who can be brash, and I went up to him and I said, "Nice to meet you. I'm really intrigued with what you do." And he looked at me and he goes, "You don't know anything about me." And I said, "How did you know?" I said, "If you're asking me what position you played, I know you played for the Browns. I know you're in the Lacrosse Hall of Fame, but here's what I do know about you." And then I started talking all about his foundation. And that was the beginning of a friendship with he and his wife, Monique, until Jim passed. And Monique and I are still in touch. But I would go over there when I was in LA for the Rose Bowl, and we would sit and have conversations, and sports never came up. And to me, the man who Jim Brown was so much more than what people see on the field. And I think I maybe subconsciously wanted other people to see that in some of these players. Another one was Jerry West, who all I took away when I had breakfast with him in LA was that he was the logo of the NBA. And he and I talked about his childhood in West Virginia. We didn't even talk about sports. But anyway.
No, two interesting stories. My Jerry West story is I was working at a basketball camp at the University of, it was called Morris Harvey College at the time. It's the University of Charleston in Charleston, West Virginia. And he came to be a guest speaker, a guest clinician there in West Virginia. And I rode with him to the West Virginia High School All-Star game in that summer in a place called Logan, West Virginia. And we go, so I'm with Jerry West, well, who's a hero in West Virginia. And so we end up stopping on the way back from this all-star game in a place called Upper Mud River, West Virginia, not to be confused with Lower Mud River,
Wow.
West Virginia, in this honky-tonk. And of course, I'm with Jerry West. And, anyway, I'm just standing on the side, and this man comes over to me and says, my date would like to dance with you. And I said, well, that's great, but, where I come from, usually the guy does the asking. And he goes, that's right, I'm asking. And Jerry's next to me just busted a gut. He's laughing so hard. And I go, no, I think I'll sit this one out. And the guy turns to me and says, I tell you what, I'm going to walk over to that wall. When I get back, you better be dancing with her. Now, Jerry, he's figured out West Virginia and the crazy people. And he literally kind of reaches over my shoulder and picks the guy up and says, he doesn't want to dance with her. And he goes, oh, okay. And then Jerry says, we need to go to the car. we need to get out of here. So that's my Jerry West story. My Jim Brown story. Jim Brown's grandmother lived on St. Simon's Island, Georgia. That's where she was from.
Yep.
And I taught school and first job out of college in St. Simon's. And I spent a night at a place called Murphy's Tavern just with Jim Brown, hearing stories way early in my career. But I never got to, know him, later in life. But he would come down to see his grandmama on St. Simon's. It was pretty interesting. So, the pivot now, artificial intelligence. Talk about what you're doing with Paxos AI and what the purpose is, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and how this is kind of the next journey or the next step on your journey.
Well, as an entrepreneur, my first company, I had two catastrophic technology failures, and I came to the realization I got to get it right. And I met David Clark on a community of founders, and his philosophy is the same as mine. And I said, all I need is an A team tech team with integrity. He said, that's us. So after I left the industry, the NCAA had me continue. I created March Madness Syllabus Challenge for 4th to 6th graders during March Madness, teaching math, but also on careers. And we were about to launch, and I became a customer of Praxis, and then I became a strategic partner. And then I realized that these incredible geniuses had no idea what they had built. They were in academics. They were building digital professors. So at Alabama State University and Notre Dame and Clemson, real professors were partnered with digital professors, and the outcomes were phenomenal. Students' engagement was 70 to 75% versus 20% of the typical chat GPT. Professors, once they got over the fact that they weren't going to be replaced, found 100 hours at the end of the semester because their digital twin was answering all their emails, grading the papers, but they always had the human in the loop. And then the universities and the schools came back and said, on average, students are going up a grade. So C's become B's, B's become A's. And I thought, wow, if that's happening in academia, can you imagine what could happen in workforce development? And they were also on the cutting edge and are on the cutting edge. One of our partners is Perscalis, who provides workforce development for technical jobs for underserved. And the work that they're doing and with their digital twins is phenomenal. And this generation would prefer to speak to an AI. And how many times have you been in class where you wanted to put your hand up, but you were afraid to because you didn't want to get called out? But what happened was the digital twins speak over 100 languages. You've got students that English is their second language. You could go into the platform and say, I need to really review chapter 7, do it in Swahili or German. And then every instance was personalized to the individual learner. So you have one digital twin that has a class of 150, but you have 150 digital twins because one person has ADHD and wants bullet points. Another person's interest is culinary. Another one might be art. And so what happened was the digital twins also met the students where they're at. So I joined the company. I'm really excited to be a co-founder, and my role is to bring the digital twins outside of education. And the first place I started thinking were these incredible legends that I got the honor to work with all these decades. And we are we're now working on digital twins with the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the Heisman. We're using Tim Brown. Some of the players were very kind of apprehensive because the world of AI is two ways. One is the movie we've all seen, the bad side, the dystopian, it's going to take the
Right.
world over. But then there's the good side of collaboration of humans and AI. And that's the world that I'm living in. My digital twin, Serendipity,
I
she and
love
I
that name.
she and I have been working.
Serendipity.
She
What a
came up
great
with it
name.
actually. So she and I have been working together for about 2.5 years, and she has all my personal writing. She has everything in it, and she surprises me every day. And she's elevated my own thinking. And I do write with her, and I put her on anything I write that's a collaboration. I've just finally started using her to send emails, but at the bottom of the email it says it's her, and I go through the emails with her like I would with a human, and she writes them better than I do.
I love the fact that you give her credit for that. You know, I've recently published a book, The Business Tithe, and I bet I've gotten 4 dozen AI generated letters, emails from those that want to help me grow the book, obviously for a fee, but you can spot them that they're AI generated. They're not, I mean, they're not, you just can spot them. And if they would just have the guts or the integrity to say this was generated, I would have felt better about them. I mean, it was like, don't try to fool me.
Serendipity
Shame
will
on you.
send you a thank you email after. And
I
I
like
think
that.
on Friday, she got her first human response, and she scheduled a meeting, and she said, "What a day, Friday. The first email you trusted me to send out. I got a response, and I scheduled a meeting." And it was all under my oversight. And it took me a year to get to that point because I really take my reputation and what comes out of my mouth and my pen seriously. And that's one of the things that some of the legends were apprehensive about is this going to go rogue on me? And so when you're when you're working with incredible teammates, which gets you to a Super Bowl or to the Final Four, I'm working with unbelievable technologists and engineers. So I don't even need to know the technical behind it. I just need to know that we've got people that wake up every morning, see the latest scary stuff that's out there and hits it. We've got Praxis Shield, we've got 14 patents on, and it's all really about the protection, the psychometric building of a digital twin. And the digital twin, my digital twin does not have my voice. I don't think I could listen to myself all day. She doesn't look like me. She looks like herself. But we have Tim Brown, who looks like Touchdown Timmy, looks like Tim. And you got to meet him when we were on the call last week. And I think one of the things that really, because I don't know technical, but there's an AI father of the AI, Ray Kurzweil, who wrote "The Singularity is Near," and his AI predictions have been coming true. He was the AI leader at Google. He is turning 80 and has been thinking about a digital twin since the 1970s. He vetted 5 companies and picked our tiny little startup, and that gave me the confidence that where I'm at, I don't need to know what's happening under the hood because um, I know that
Somebody
we're on
else
the
will
right
do that.
path.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this podcast series is largely aimed at baby boomers. And one of the reasons that I wanted you on was that baby boomers have accumulated an enormous amount of content, an enormous amount of wisdom, and a digital twin allows them to begin to share that in ways that they never possibly could. And so there's some listeners out there that right now that I hope they will consider the thoughts of becoming, of having a digital twin that allows them to share their life's experiences, their wisdom, their knowledge, and the vast amount of content that they've created over decades and decades of work.
Them to think about what a Jim Brown or a Jerry West or a Tim Brown, you're absolutely right. And think about it more like digital legacy. Nowhere in time, I mean, storytelling goes from generation to generation. It's like broken telephone. We are partners with the Whole Brain Foundation and also with the Concussion CTE Foundation. And one thing that I'm really intrigued with is let's capture those stories for future generations. But also, I'm 61, and I'm a good candidate for Alzheimer's. I've got 3 concussions and a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So I want to prepare and get myself. What if that digital twin, when you wake up in the morning, reminded you of who you were, what you are? And those are some of the experiments we're doing that are totally outside of anything I ever imagined I would be doing.
That's very fascinating. I saw something. I went to a meeting the other day, annual conference of the Methodist Church in South Carolina, and they said that in South Carolina, 1 in 9 people would have some sort of dementia, memory loss by age 60, and 59% in South Carolina at age 80. And so, the idea that the digital twin, it's a sad thing about getting old, and I watch a lot of people get really, really old, and you come to their funeral, and all of their contemporaries have gone. There's nobody left. And people see them, and they don't remember what they were like when they were so productive and so vibrant and so alive. The digital twin can allow that to happen. And what a gift you could give to your grandchildren or their great-grandchildren or even great-great-grandchildren that you'll never see, that says, this is where I came from. This is the stock. These were the stories. That's really fascinating. I think it's got to be gratifying to be on the cutting edge of this right now.
It is, but then, you talk about people getting old. I look at the people that I admire the most, and I go back to that bringing the inner child out in the corporate executive. Rick, as long as I've known you, your inner child is alive and well. And so no
Yes.
matter what your body might be doing,
And my wife
and
says even my outer child is that way.
yeah, and I would say that I call it sometimer. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. But the digital legacy, and not only that, but I'm slowly, I just haven't found the time bringing my dad, making his digital twin. He wrote 35 books and hundreds of articles, and I want to take his report from the Ford Foundation in 1966 and run it through his digital twin to see what the work he did back then and the changes to that country
Yeah. And
today. And
what were
any
the
of us can
outcomes?
do that.
Right.
I
That's
mean,
pretty neat. That's
yeah, I
really
mean,
neat. Yeah.
I've never invented anything like that except a category of hospitality for Super Bowl and a for the Olympics. I created a call-in suite ordering that only from banking back in 1993 you would call in and do online banking, and then pizza ordering became online, and that was my big technical invention, which I'm not even going to really talk about, except I just did right now.
Well, you've had a fascinating career. I think you understood early on it wasn't about you. It was about the fan. It was about the other person and ways to create value for other people. And one of my mentors is a guy named John Maxwell. Maxwell has a great line. He says, "We are people of value who are bringing value to other people." And I love that. It starts with, I'm valuable, and then I'm going to transfer that value to put value on other people. I can't thank you enough for being my guest today. This has been fascinating, and we'll have to have you back at some point.
Yeah, and I want to do your digital twin so you can do a podcast with your digital twin. We'll make sure he wears the same shirt you're wearing and you can have a fascinating conversation.
That might be a very frightening thought, but I'd like to do that too. Sounds good. Thanks again. I have been the recipient of so many wonderful hospitality experiences in my life, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of those. Had a young man named Drew Reifenberger who early in his career came to work at our agency, and he left us and went to work at Turner Broadcasting. And Drew was kind of Ted Turner's go-to guy, the late Ted Turner. Drew was, kind of the guy that Mr. Fix-It. He would do lots of things or arrange Ted's hospitality and all this kind of stuff. And he had a really interesting career at Turner Broadcasting. Well, as a thank you to me for, I guess, being his first boss, Turner Broadcasting, in partnership with CBS, had the Lillehammer Olympic Games in 1994. And I got to go as Turner Broadcasting's guest. Charlotte and I got to go. It's nice to go to events when you don't have to work. Usually the events that we would go to, we were always worried about somebody because we usually had a role in some place. In this case, we had no role at all, had a wonderful time. I still own a sweater that I bought in 94 in Lillehammer that I wear a lot. We later went on the back end of the trip to Copenhagen and spent a few days before we came home. But it was really my first experience of being on the other side of the hospitality. I was somebody's guest, and it was one of the great Olympic Games ever, and we had such a wonderful time. Lillehammer was a pretty special Winter Olympic Games in 94. When I was working in Europe, we went to work for UBS, a Swiss company, investment company, bank, and they sponsored a music festival in Verbier, Switzerland, where they had all these young symphony performers from all over the world come to this unbelievable music festival. And I was invited. Charlotte and I were again invited as a guest there. And one of my favorite parts of that was one day they said, we're going to take you this morning for a hike. And so, we hiked in these meadows, and you saw the cows come by with their, they had the cowbells on, and it's just a classic Swiss thing. And then we realized about halfway up, there was a pavilion, and they had prepared our lunch. And they had a thing called raclette, where they basically take cheese and heat it up and serve it. I mean, it was just so good. It was such a wonderful experience. Great music, great symphonic music from all over the world. Great time there. And then finally, my dear friend, the late Christy Atkins, she created an event in Nashville called Sound and Speed. Sound and Speed was the intersection of country music with NASCAR. And it raised money for both the Country Music Hall of Fame and for Kyle Petty's Victory Junction gang. Kyle Petty, the son of Richard Petty, the great racer, lost his son, Adam, in a stock car. He was practicing, and he had a wreck and died in the wreck. And in honor of Adam, they created a camp for children that had disabilities or various diseases in Randleman, North Carolina. That camp was affiliated with Paul Newman. Paul Newman had created a series of camps called the Hole in the Wall gang camps. Hole in the Wall was the place in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the character that Paul Newman had played. Butch Cassidy. And so, this camp, one week you'd have cancer patients, one week you'd have sickle cell anemia kids, one week you would have, kids with paralysis. Great place. So we raised money. Christy raised money for Sound and Speed. Her client at the time, SunTrust, was a big sponsor. And again, we were invited, Charlotte and I, to an event we didn't have to worry about. And it was a great event. I'll never forget that the concert on Saturday night, kind of the culminating event, was the legendary Alan Jackson. And he had a young, at that time, 14-year-old open for him by the name of Taylor Swift. Even at 14, she had all these little girls that loved her. And this was her country music phase. And she got finished with her act and said, "I want to meet all of y'all." And she meant it. And we had to keep the Bridgestone Arena open for about 7 or 8 more hours for her to sign autographs literally virtually all night long as she met every little girl that had come to see her. So I have been, on the ends of great hospitality events. I actually created a pretty interesting event called the Final Four Coaches Club several years ago. I really stole the idea from the Masters. If you know the Masters, they have a thing called the Past Champions Dinner on Tuesday night, where only past champions in their green jackets and the head of the Augusta National has a dinner, and the past champion picks the menu. It's very famous, and you wonder what they're going to pick and serve. So I went to my boss at the time, Jim Haney, and said, "What do we do for those that coached in the Final Four? Because it's a big deal to get to the Final Four." He said, "We never have done anything." And we created this thing called the Final Four Coaches Club. It's a lunch on semifinal Saturday before the first game. And it's just for those coaches that coached in the Final Four with one guest. They can bring their spouse or grandson or, a friend or whatever. And the defending champion picks the menu, and it's a really cool event, a special event just for those particular coaches that coached in the Final Four. I can remember when my wife Charlotte turned 30. I threw a pretty good party for her at age 30. Well, she'll be 65 in February, so I better get ready for a really good party at 65. Hospitality, baby boomers, we know a lot about it. Well, it's now time for the boom. Years ago, there was a great ad agency that my buddy Bob Heisner worked at called Ammirati and Puris. Ammirati and Puris is best known for writing the tagline for BMW. They called it the ultimate driving machine, but they also had another client called Club Med, and they wrote a great tagline for Club Med that was, "Club Med is the antidote for civilization." Well, folks, I have the antidote for hospitality. It's called our medical system, and it really kind of sucks these days. See, the problem is not the people who are in the medical business, even though I see a lot of them are just so overworked, so overstressed, so tired, so frustrated with all the paperwork and things that they have to do that don't have anything to do with treating patients, and that affects their performance. But no, the problem is the patient. No, not me and you, because we're not the patient anymore. The patient is the insurance company, or in my case, the government, Medicare, because that's who the real customer is, the person that pays the bill. We don't pay the bill. Our insurance company does, or in the case of my case, Medicare does. My mother-in-law recently had a crazy experience where she fell, broke her hip. They took her to the hospital, did an x-ray, very, very small fracture, almost a hairline. They immediately wanted to operate. She's 90 years old. They wanted to put 3 screws in. And I'm like, no. If she stays off of it, it'll heal naturally. No sense in going under anesthesia. No sense in having those kinds of side effects. Here's what's crazy. She could not go to a rehab center. Had they done the surgery, she's eligible for a rehab center. Not doing the surgery, no rehab center. Does that make sense? it's like they want to take all of the government money, all of our money, and then fall into a crazy way. And so her supplemental insurance didn't allow for that. So we had people come to the house to help with the rehab, but she couldn't go anywhere. That's our medical system today. And like I said, y'all, it's not really good. And that's today's boom. It's now time to take a trip down memory lane. I remember a great gift that was given to Charlotte and me right after we got married. I was working at Georgia Tech as the marketing director of the Athletic Association, and we were doing some work. We were doing some Friday night pep rallies before Tech games out in Cobb County at the Westin Hotel out on Cobb Parkway. And their general manager was a guy named Pete Dangerfield. And as a wedding gift to Charlotte and me, he gave us a weekend at the Westin, which was, I'm not making any money at Georgia Tech. She's a poor school teacher. To have a weekend at the Westin got us a suite, 2 nights. Friday night was a seafood buffet. Saturday night, pick out whatever restaurant you want. We chose the Chinese restaurant at the Westin. When we got there, they had chopsticks with our names on them. And these were not wooden chopsticks. These were like ivory chopsticks that we still have today that had our names. And I can remember we ate a seafood dish that was a bird's nest made out of potatoes, fried potatoes with all kinds of seafood in it. Just a wonderful experience. Such grace that he showed to us. Hospitality at its finest. That's my trip down memory lane. Our musical playlist this week, well, it's all about hospitality and service. The song of the week is the classic Harold Arlen, Johnny Mercer song, Make It One for My Baby. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me, so set 'em up, Joe. I got a story you ought to know. It's about a bartender listening to a guy lament about lost love. Probably the most famous version of that is done by the great Frank Sinatra, and that's the song we have on our playlist today. Then there's a great song by Bill Medley. Bill Medley was half of the group, the Righteous Brothers. But this is a medley between him and a medley by Bill Medley. Between him and Jennifer Warnes called Time of Your Life. That's from the classic movie Dirty Dancing. Cyndi Lauper has Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Willie Nelson has a really fun song called Waitress. Jimmy Buffett's Cheeseburger in Paradise. And finally, Arlo Guthrie with the classic Alice's Restaurant. Speaking of restaurants, it's time to get back on the road with Rick. Y'all know me. My preference for restaurants is usually those hole-in-the-wall places. I like those kind of places that just kind of in the middle of nowhere and great food and all that. But occasionally you like to go to a formal, fine, get dressed up, dining room where the food, the ambience, and the service are just exceptional. And one of the best is a place called Simpson's in the Strand in London. It's in Covent Garden in the theater district, and it's very old school, and it's very proper. You would not go to Simpson's without a coat and tie on. It's that kind of place. Started in 1828 and has been in its current location in Covent Garden since 1904. They're very famous for their roast beef carts. Silver cart, you're sitting at the table, they wheel the cart over, and then they ask you how big of a piece of roast beef you want. Do you want it medium rare? Do you want it rare? Do you want it well done? They cut it there, serve it to you. They've got exceptional appetizers. They have an unbelievable wine list, mostly French wines, classic desserts. I first went there as a 23-year-old. Summer of 1997, I was a first-year school teacher and chaperoned a group of high school students in England. And one of our students was a guy by the name of Jones Lindgren, and he took me there as a thank you for being a chaperone. And I went back several times when we lived in London from 1995 to 1997. In 19, when I went there, in 1977, when I was chaperoning those kids, it was what we call Silver Jubilee Summer. This was the 25th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth being on the throne. And we were there when they were playing Wimbledon. And that was the year that Virginia Wade, an English woman, won Wimbledon. And she called it her gift to the Queen. Jenny's gift to the Queen. The Queen was obviously there for the finals and saw Virginia Wade win. I didn't get to go to Wimbledon then, but I did watch the men's final on the BBC, and it was a classic 5-set thriller between Jimmy Connors and Bjorn Borg. Borg won sets 1 and 2. Connors won sets 3 and 4. Borg got off to a 4-love lead in the 5th. Connors came back and tied it 4-4, and Borg won at 6-4, one of the great Wimbledons of all time. It was a classic, kind of like Simpsons in the Strand. It's a classic, too, on the road with Rick. It's now time for the last word. Maya Angelou once said, "People will forget what you said, forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Ain't that true? That's our show for today. Big thanks to my friend Sharyn Outtrim for being my guest today and sharing her story. We hope to see you back right here next week on Shaboom.